Now, the big moment. Our new Minister of Agriculture, Mr. John Steenhuisen. John has been in agriculture, had been a politician since 1999. And John, you stated in your priorities as the Minister of Agriculture include a focus on biosecurity, which clearly we need when we're in the area, and to increase production, finding new markets for South African products, support for small-scale farmers as well as large commercial operations, to improve infrastructure and to use the department to leverage rural safety and water concerns throughout South Africa. I think you've hit it on the nail on the head. A lot of the issues that you raised are what have been affecting us. We are all very eager to hear some good news and some positive stories from you. Please welcome our new Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very, very much, Peter, and good morning to all of the delegates, and a special good morning to the MEC of Agriculture in the Eastern Cape Province, MEC. It's good to be with you. To the Mayor of the local municipality, Councillor Hutting-Borman, thank you again for the wonderful welcome in your municipality. It's always great to be here with you. And of course to the other guest speakers that are going to be participating today. Christel, ek wou eerst sê, ek is Vrydag in Grabouw, saam met die appelboere daar in die GDA. So ek sal daai boodskap vat en ek werk saam met hulle om dinge daar te verbeter in Grabouw, en ek sal jou groete daar stuur vir almal daar in Grabouw. It's obviously a huge honor to address the Agri Eastern Cape, and this is the first agricultural organization that I'm formally addressing. I've obviously had some informal meetings, so this is my first outing, so thank you very much. I was saying to people last night, I also was very lucky to come to the Eastern Cape a couple of weeks ago on a more recreational trip where I got to meet Peter Klutti at the beautiful Grey Wing Lodge in Maltino with the Brosters, and it was great to get some of the insights. So Agri Eastern Cape was the first organization in my ear a week after I was elected as the minister. So thank you very much, Peter, for your guidance there. And obviously this is a huge moment for South Africa. This is really an opportunity for us to see seismic change. And I think that when we are caught up in the events that are taking place, we often lose sight of just how momentous things are. Lenin famously said that there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And certainly those 2 weeks after the 29th of May general election have fundamentally altered the South African political landscape forever. Who would have thought that we'd be sitting in a government of national unity? Who would have thought that South Africa would have a new lease on the future? But here we are. And we must not underestimate just how far we've come in such a short space of time. For almost 30 years, South Africa has been governed by a single party. That has now fundamentally changed. We have a government of national unity made up of 10 political parties, and which commands an overwhelming majority in the National Assembly. So the prospects now for real reform and real change are there. It also happened very quickly, and I know that many people were certainly, I was receiving calls from people saying, you guys got to get this deal done, you know, you're taking too long, why are you guys bickering, why are you exchanging letters, you know, what's going on here? And I think we take for granted that we put a government of national unity together with 10 political parties in 2 weeks. It took the Dutch, I think, with 4 political parties, almost a year to get theirs, right? It took the Belgians over a year, and it took the Germans 6 months. So, you know, as they say in South Africa, boer maak 'n plan, and we made that plan very quickly after the election, and that is how we have now ended up with a government of national unity. And so far, so good. We've had our first cabinet lekgotla. We've had some documentation, some inputs from Treasury, and Christel, there'll be some very good news coming your way in October when that medium-term budget policy statement comes out. There's some very exciting new reforms and some exciting news that's going to come out of it, which I hope are going to move some of those graphs in the upward direction going there around actually getting to grips with the reform. I think we're riding at the moment a lot of sentiment, particularly on the currencies and particularly on some of the on investor sentiment. But I think once people start to see that there are now serious reforms on the table and there is a renewed drive for implementation, there's huge opportunities. And so obviously, we now have a government of national unity, negotiated positions. We, as the former official opposition, have 6 cabinet seats at a national level, 6 deputy cabinet seats. And of course, there was much amusement when I was announced as the agriculture minister by President Ramaphosa on that Sunday evening. It was quickly followed up by a number of memes. I'm sure you've seen them all, of me in the boerable shorts. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Those aren't my legs in that particular clip. There's been pictures of me driving tractors, and of course, Huisgenoot renaming me John Steenhuisen. So it's all very exciting. So people might have said, but why agriculture? Why would you, as the leader of a political party that had your choice of any one of the 6 portfolios, would you take agriculture? And I took it for a very, very important reason, and that is because I fundamentally believe that if we're going to change South Africa for the better, it's going to start in the agricultural sector in South Africa. M.S. Swaminathan, who is a famous Indian scientist and who led the Green Agriculture Revolution, said, and I quote, "If agriculture goes wrong, nothing else will have a chance to go right," unquote. And he's absolutely right. The huge opportunities for agriculture and its importance not only to the well-being of the South African people, but also to our economy, cannot be understated. So whilst you may need the Public Works Minister, once every couple of years when you're looking to move buildings or requiring some repair work to be done, and you may need the Home Affairs Minister when you need a visa or you need to go and get your ID book or some other service, and you may need the Basic Education Minister when things go wrong at your school a couple of times a year, and certainly the Forestry and Fisheries Minister, not necessarily nearly as much, but you need the Agricultural Minister 3 times a day, because every time somebody puts food in their mouth at a meal time, if they're lucky enough to have 3 meals a day, comes back down to agriculture. I also believe there is huge opportunities in the agricultural sector to deal with one of the immediate crises that we have in South Africa, and that is the unemployment rate. We have a 42% unemployment rate on the expanded measure in South Africa, and this is a significant socio-economic disaster sitting on the balance sheet of South Africa. We simply have to get more South Africans into work. And if one looks at the shape of that unemployment, of that 42%, the vast majority of that 42% are unskilled South Africans. They do not have technical training, they don't have vocational training, and there's a large percentage of them are young people who have not got opportunities to find work. And if you look at how the modern economies transitioned through from being developing economies into developed economies, agriculture was the common denominator starting point for all of them. And there's huge opportunity, therefore, in the agriculture and agro-processing sector to be able to come, if it can grow sufficiently, if it can get the support that it needs, to become an absorber of large numbers of unskilled labor and getting people into work, getting people into employment. And we also know that nothing stops violent crime like a job, nothing stops poverty like a job, nothing stops suffering like a job. And the huge opportunity that exists for both skilled and unskilled job absorption in the agricultural sector cannot be understated. It is also the sector where, as you've seen, can be a driver of massive economic growth. And Christelle's presentation showed very clearly just how important agriculture has been to the overall health of our GDP in South Africa, and how it has essentially been propping up the rest of the economy in terms of economic growth for South Africa. And that is in a very, very tough environment. It is in an environment that the odds have been stacked against the agricultural sector, and things have been made incredibly difficult. We've had almost a decade of policy uncertainty around expropriation without compensation. We've had massive growth in violent crime in rural areas and in farm communities. We've had huge problems with biosecurity issues, avian flu, African swine flu, African horse sickness, and now recently the outbreaks of foot and mouth disease. And despite all of that, despite all of those obstacles, you've been able to see the agricultural sector propping up the rest of the economy. And imagine what we could do and what that graph would look like if we were able to remove these obstacles that have been in the way and preventing it from really taking off to where the sector should be. And imagine what we can do for economic growth in South Africa if we can get that right. So I chose the agriculture portfolio because I fundamentally believe that there are big changes that we can make. I think there are huge opportunities for growth, for economic development, but also for job creation, but also ways in which we can ensure South Africa's economic health improves dramatically. Now, as you know, the department is being separated currently. It used to be the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. The department will be splitting in the next couple of months, and Land Reform and Rural Development will be going off under another ministry. This is not the first time that agriculture has been split. It used to, remember, be a portfolio on its own. It was then put with forestry and fisheries. That was then changed to Land Reform and Rural Development. Now, obviously, there's some implications in, as I said in my speech in Parliament to the Portfolio Committee, that whilst we may be getting a divorce as the two departments, we're going to have to retain some sort of relationship because we have children together. And the two portfolios are going to have to have some common working relationship in order to deal with things like land settlements, the allocation of land, and some of the outstanding issues. But I do believe there is an upside to the splitting of the departments. And that is borne out by the fact that we will now have a department that focuses on agriculture, agro-processing, and the advancement of that industry and sector with a clear focus on that. If one looks at the department, and certainly I look at the budget speeches from last year, I look at a lot of the documentation that's come there, Land Reform and Rural Development has sucked up a lot of the oxygen and attention of the minister and of the portfolio committee and of the various mechanisms. I think it's going to be healthy to again have agriculture on its own with a strong focus on what needs to be done in the agriculture and agro-processing sector, and to make sure that it's getting the full-time attention of the ministry to make sure that those aspects of the agriculture and agro-processing master plan where government has made commitments need to be applied and strengthened and quickened can be done. And I think that that's going to be very, very important going forward. I wanted to share a few of the priorities that I've outlined in the budget speech this year. And again, the budget that was tabled this year in Parliament was the legacy budget of the 6th administration. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Treasury has rules and certain timeframes for budgets to be passed. By the 29th of July, we had to have had the budget passed, had to have gone through the line items by department, and those have had to go through Parliament. So I want to be very clear that those budgets that were passed were legacy budgets of the 6th administration. There's been a commitment by the Finance Minister and with the various departmental heads and at a cabinet level that we will now embark upon a process of prioritizing, reprioritizing, so when the medium-term budget policy statement comes out, and certainly the February budget next year comes out, it will be the first budget that is truly owned by the Government of National Unity. And I think will better reflect some of the new priorities and some of the new thinking that is coming out of Treasury and out of the various departments, and will be I believe, a far more focused budget on what really needs to be done over the next 5 years to get the economy growing, to get us off this high debt, low growth, high unemployment trajectory, and onto a new trajectory of hope opportunity and prosperity for more South Africans. So some of the key priorities that are outlined in the budget this year, and Peter has kindly done a good introduction of them. And the first thing is biosecurity. And nowhere, I suppose, is this more relevant than right where we sit here today in the Eastern Cape, which has now had a devastating outbreak of foot and mouth disease with quite serious consequences for both farmers, but also for the agricultural economy here in the Eastern Cape and also nationally. Obviously, we need to focus on massively improving biosecurity. And I want to thank the mayor of the local municipality, Hateng Borman, for yesterday having got his council to declare this a natural disaster and a state of disaster, which I think will allow some mechanisms, particularly with the banks, to be able to be expedited and kicked in. As you know, I gazetted a couple of days ago a disaster management area for the Eastern Cape. But we obviously need to be a lot more proactive about how we deal with biosecurity issues in South Africa. I'm incredibly concerned about the state of the OBP, the Ondersport biological products, because there's clearly been a shortage of foot and mouth vaccines. We're currently importing a large number of them from Botswana. And it shouldn't be that a country which should be the leading country on the continent should have to now go to other countries to source vaccines. And I've certainly made OBP and the problems associated with it a priority area. If OBP is not able to produce the number, quantity, and types of vaccines that we need in South Africa, then we need to open up to allow other players into the market to be able to meet the demands. It cannot be right that we have insufficient stocks of African horse sickness vaccines, of foot and mouth vaccines, and other products that are required, where you have a monopoly existing, but that monopoly is not able to then supply the market. We need to do something about massively improving access, quality, and quantity of vaccines in South Africa. I think that there was a very, very good report commissioned by my predecessor, Minister Didiza, who, as many of you know, has now assumed the role of Speaker in the National Assembly. She commissioned a report on biosecurity, and it made some incredibly good recommendations. Unfortunately, some of them have not yet been implemented, and it's going to be a priority of the department to go through that report very methodologically and to start implementing those recommendations that were made there. But biosecurity is everybody's business. It can't just be the business of government. It has to be a culture and a movement that is adopted by everybody, from farm gate level all the way up to government. And we have to work together so when regulations are made, when biosecurity mechanisms and protocols are put in place, that they are practiced and carried out by everybody to ensure that this becomes a new culture. Why is this important? It's important because if we are going to be accessing new markets for South African agricultural products, we need to make sure that South Africa products become synonymous with excellent biosecurity, and that we don't have issues that then affect price and our ability to export South African products to other countries because of biosecurity concerns. We need the world to know that South Africa's agricultural environment practices amongst the best biosecurity and phytosanitary practices in the world. And I'm confident if we can do that, we will be able to open up new markets for South African products in far greater numbers than we have to date. Secondly, obviously focusing on exports. Huge opportunity for South Africa to earn foreign revenue, but also huge opportunities for our South African farmers to be able to massively improve their profitability and their viability and sustainability as agricultural operations. I think there has to be a far more laser-like focus between DIRCO and the department and the Agricultural Marketing Council and on industry bodies, looking at how we can really expand existing agreements, things like AGOA, and we're currently in the process of renegotiating the AGOA trade agreement. And just this week, my counterpart, Andrew Whitfield, who's the Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry and who comes from the Eastern Cape, was in Washington to make the case why we should remain in AGOA and why we should still continue to benefit from the favorable conditions that go there. And focusing on expanding existing agreements, but then also looking for new countries for us to export goods to. And a number of new regions have started to open up to South Africa. We've been opening up markets like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Vietnam, and many others. And just a fortnight ago, the first avocados from South Africa landed in Japan as part of a new market that has opened up there. So there is really new horizons that we need to seek for agriculture in South Africa to ensure that we get our excellent products to international markets as quickly as possible. Then water rights and water access is going to be a priority. And obviously there's been a new policy dispensation, and my predecessor as well was involved in a number of negotiations there. But we have to make sure that there's absolute certainty and clarity on water and access for water for agricultural use, how we improve access to water, how we improve the dam infrastructure. And having looked at some of the reports from the Agriculture Research Council and some of the other industry bodies, showing just by raising dam walls, the amount of irrigable land that becomes available and the amount of agricultural expansion that is possible just through something simple as improving the height of a dam wall. We need to have a look at those. There are a number of the dams that are scheduled, and the President did announce some of those in his State of the Nation address recently, where we'll be working with water and sanitation to look at how we can improve that access. Food security is also going to be an absolutely essential focus. I've just got back from the G20 summit that was held in Rio de Janeiro, which focused on food security and measures to be able to improve it and to ensure that every citizen in South Africa has access to affordable, available, nutritious, and safe food. This is incredibly important given the fact that we have a huge problem with childhood malnutrition in South Africa, childhood stunting. There's no reason why a country that produces as much food as we do should have so many people going hungry. It has been very impressive to spend some time in Brazil and to meet with other countries in the G20 to look at the mechanisms that they are putting in place to promote food security. In that light, there were some very good discussions that were held on the sidelines with international organizations like IFAD, like the FOA and others, who are very keen to partner with South Africa to look at how we can put in place mechanisms to ensure far more sustainable farming practices, particularly in rural areas, particularly with emerging farmers. Huge old irrigation schemes here in the Eastern Cape that should be revived, being able to ensure that rural communities have good access through sustainable farming practices to ensuring that there is sufficient food production. And we need to make sure that no South African actually ends up hungry, and that we are taking care of all of our citizens and ensuring that they have access to safe, nutritious, available, and affordable foodstuffs in the country. Then fifthly, policy certainty. And this is fundamentally important, that the sector understands the rules of the game, understands the framework, and that these are not moving goalposts, so that there is certainty. If you set out on a certain path, you know what the parameters are, and you know exactly where the department stands on various aspects, what is allowed, what isn't allowed. I know that many people have contacted me in sheer frustration with shifting goalposts. And I think the more we can peg down regulatory and policy certainty, the better it will be for everybody involved in the sector. Then we also need to look at the regulatory environment. A lot of the legislation that currently governs the agricultural sector is outdated. It is no longer applicable. The world has moved on. Modern technology has developed in staggering ways, and agriculture has become science. And we need to make sure that the regulatory and legislative environment in South Africa catches up with the rest of the world, and that we're not holding ourselves back and being restrained by legislation like Act 36, which dates back to 1947, and that we're actually able to make sure that our farmers and our sector here in South Africa can remain on the cutting edge of technology advancements around the world, biological advancements around the world, so that we can make sure that we remain up there with the world's best, and that we maximize the potential that we have in South Africa to ensure that that is there. Allied with policy certainty is the protection of agricultural land, and I am incredibly concerned at the encroachment on good agricultural land by industries, property development, mining and mineral exploration, and the negative effect that this is going to have on agricultural land. And once we lose agricultural land, it is lost forever. You're never going to see a housing development or a factory or a mine demolished to put agriculture back on. And we need to make sure that once that land is identified, and we set out very clearly what we require in South Africa as a minimum for our own food security and our own advancement, that we set out very, very clearly to protect and entrench the agricultural land, so we don't end up with a situation where we end up having to become net importers of food and reliant on food from other countries because our agricultural land has been frittered away in other industries. Somebody pointed out to me this morning that the Constitution guarantees South Africans the right to good, clean, safe environments, to food and food security, and these are the primary rights contained in the Bill of Rights. Nowhere does it talk about mining rights or property development rights there. And yet these things can, if not managed properly, impinge and impede the ability of us to be able to produce food in South Africa, to feed our nation, and to ensure food security for our country. Sixth priority is disaster management. And although this has never been the main focus of the department and falls under cooperative governance and traditional affairs, the department is going to have to step into this space. Given the massive extreme weather incidents that we've seen, fires, droughts, there's going to have to be built a greater capacity within the department to be able to assist with disaster management issues when they arrive. It's not viable or possible for farmers to wait 6 to 8 months for a natural disaster to be declared at a national level before aid and assistance can be flowing into areas. We need to be able to develop in-house mechanisms within the department to be able to assist in issues like droughts, like fires, like the issue with black frost that we've seen, like foot and mouth, and like other phytosanitary issues that arise from time to time, to be able to get in there. And then we need to focus on building resilience in the sector to be able to mitigate against the climate change and extreme weather incidents that we've seen going forward. Seventh, infrastructure. Infrastructure is absolutely essential. And again, whilst not falling directly under the Department of Agriculture, the veins and arteries that underpin the sector are our roads and our rail networks and our ports. And if our infrastructure is broken and not working, it impacts on the ability of farmers and the sector to get their goods to not only local markets, but to international markets. And in this instance, I'm very, very glad that Operation Vulindlela is starting to bear fruit. And there's going to be some very exciting news in a couple of months' time about the concessioning of some of the key rail routes and far more realistic concession timetables, which I think are going to be very good. The white paper on rail has gone through Cabinet, and we're obviously looking forward to seeing the expansion of that. Operation Vulindlela has input in places like the Port of Durban has already started to bear fruit, but I think we need to move much faster in ensuring that we are able to build public-private partnerships in our rail and port systems to be able to get those goods to market and to make it easier to move products around the country as quickly as possible. But the failure of rail has unintended knock-on consequences, and I look at the huge lost potential that existed in South Africa with the fertilizer crisis that hit us when the Ukraine conflict broke out. In Palabora, we have Phoscor, one of the greatest access to phosphates. We should have been at the world's edge, cutting edge of being able to get our fertilizer products to the world, but a breakdown in the amount of trucks that can move between Palabora and Richards Bay Harbour, where the mixing gets done, and a broken conveyor belt there, meant that we were not only left behind, but in terms of producing our own fertilizers, but we also lost out on the ability to be able to export to other parts of the world, but also made our own people subject then to the massive 300% increase in fertilizer input costs in South Africa. All down to the fact that if we'd had a decent rail system with enough capacity to be able to move just between those two centers, we could have not only gained opportunities, but mitigated against much of the harmful effect and the rise of the input costs during this time. The same arises with electricity, and obviously the knock-on effect of the electricity crisis has had disastrous consequences for the agricultural sector. And I'm very, very glad that we're starting to see some progress towards dealing with this issue, and it is going to continue apace under the 7th administration in the Government of National Unity. I think we also welcome the fact that the President announced in the State of the Nation address a relook at fuel levies and how fuel levies are structured to see what we can do to try and bring down the cost of diesel and of petrol and other fuels in South Africa. And then municipalities. Municipalities are cited as one of the big constraints towards agriculture and agricultural sector growth. Problems with sewage running into irrigation schemes and water sources through sewage pump stations that are broken, not working, and the huge damage that does to crops. The state of municipal roads and the ability to be able to move just around farming operations as well as getting people's products to markets, breakdown of electricity infrastructure and water infrastructure. All of these have a massive knock-on effect on the agricultural sector. So again, not falling under the department directly, but making sure that we are interacting as a department with these other government departments and making sure that the voice of agriculture is heard loud and clear around the cabinet table, and that these particular departments are aware of the fact that should they fail in their mandate, it's going to have terrible effects on a variety of other industries, most notably the agricultural industry. In this regard as well, and as Stella's already shown, they're very welcome that there's now a move to expand Operation Vulindlela now to a local government level, because that is really where the rubber hits the road, and that's the first interaction that many of you have with government is a municipal level. And if we can get our municipal level fixed, we can get competent, well-run municipalities up and going that are financially sustainable and viable. I believe it will fundamentally start to improve the situation for everybody on the ground. 8th, safety and security. And again, not a mandate that falls directly under the department, but also one of the priorities in the agriculture and agro-processing master plan. How do we focus on improving rural safety? What are the issues that we could be driving in that particular area to keep the agriculture department's greatest assets safe? Our greatest assets are our farmers and our farm workers. They are the people who make the sector move and work, and without them, there is no sector. And it is not right that we sit in a situation where many, many people are sitting on farms worried about their safety, worried about the safety of their families, and have had to bear the brunt of some terribly violent attacks. I believe there's much more we could be doing to improve rural safety, particularly safety for farmers and farm workers. And I think that there's much more we could be looking at technologically to be able to take advantage of modern, progressive innovations that have occurred. Things like drone technology, things like camera systems, which make it far easier to patrol and manage vast areas than necessarily having boots on the ground. And then I think we should be looking at developing a reservist system that would be able to implement a similar program to the old commando system, so we can make sure that there are intelligence-led operations being driven in rural areas to target stock thieves, to target people who are doing farm attacks. And then finally, the department needs to, like the Western Cape Agriculture Department has done, to set up a court-watching brief program where attacks on farmers and farm workers ensure that there is a representative of the department in court to make sure and keep an eye on the fact that the prosecution is being dealt with properly, to be able to ensure that the case is being investigated properly, so we can start to see convictions in these cases, and there can be consequences for those who choose to wreak havoc in our rural areas and terrorize our rural communities. Finally, building a partnership. This relationship between the department and the farmers is built on a partnership. The reality is that the expertise and the excellence actually lies within the farming communities and the agricultural organizations and organized agriculture. That's where the expertise exists. And we should be working together as both the department and organized agriculture and farmers from across the spectrum, from small emerging farmers to the largest commercial farmers, in a partnership arrangement. How can we work and support each other to be able to make the sector grow? How can we ensure that extension services deliver what they need to be doing? How can we make sure that we are able to have honest discussions about the red tape and procedures that are holding farmers and organized agriculture back from being able to achieve its growth and objectives as it sees? And again, coming back to the G20, some of the most successful programs around the world have been through a strong partnership between government and agriculture, players, actors, and organizations. And so I want to recommit again to say that I have an open door policy to anybody who needs to see me, to anybody who has an idea, to anybody who has a concern that they wish to share. And please know that there will always be an open door in Pretoria and Cape Town, or on Zoom or on WhatsApp, or wherever it'll be, for any concerns that people may have, to come and see me and talk things through. Let's not talk to each other through the media. Let's not pick fights with each other on unnecessary things when the door is open. I'm all ears. I'm new in the department. I'm very keen to learn. I'm very keen to listen. So I believe fundamentally that if we can get this partnership right, that we will be able to serve not only agriculture, but serve our country better. And so we now have a second chance for the future of South Africa. President Ramaphosa set out very clearly in his State of the Nation address what it means now for the future of South Africa under the GNU. We have 5 years, and we have to use these 5 years wisely in order to make sure that we improve the lives of ordinary South Africans across the spectrum. We have to choose whether we are builders or whether we are the breakers. And the reality is that if we choose to be builders, government cannot do it alone. We need a whole of society approach to address the many problems facing not only this sector, but the problems facing the rest of South Africa. This whole of society approach has started to find fertile ground in Operation Vulindlela, in the improvements in the rail sector, in the improvements in energy. The medium-term budget, medium-term development plan that the Cabinet Lekgotla spent a weekend working on just a few weeks ago contains some really exciting new plans about how we are going to, as the Government of National Unity under President Ramaphosa, start to rapidly accelerate growth, development, and opportunities in South Africa. How we're going to leverage the opportunities that have been in the past but have not necessarily been exploited. But we're going to have to do it by working together. And it's going to require the goodness and of the best South Africans to unite and come together to make sure that we make it work. Because frankly, the alternative is too ghastly to contemplate. Had we not been able to get the Government of National Unity off the ground, I would only point you to the events in Venezuela in the last 48 hours to understand what fate could have awaited South Africa had things moved in the other direction. Instead, the builders have decided to put aside decades of political infighting and political squabbling, to take hands to put the country first, ahead of party, and to work together towards a more inclusive future for our country. And so it's going to require all of us now, if we choose to be builders, and it is a time for the choosing. And every South African is going to have to sit in the coming weeks and decide, am I a builder or am I a breaker? And if the builders are going to work together, we need to roll up our sleeves, we need to put our shoulder to the wheel, and we need to get out there and make it happen. The farming sector, farmers, and the agricultural sector and farm workers have shown us that they can succeed no matter how tough the times are. And that your theme of this Congress, positivity in tough times, has been proven time and time again that it is farmers, it is farm workers who have overcome the most incredible obstacles and adversity and climbed the steeper hills still to be able to produce the type of results that were there. And it reminded me, where I end today, of that great quote by James Schuller, who said that tough times never last, but tough people do. We have the toughest people in this sector in South Africa, and I look forward to working with all of you as we build a better, more prosperous future for all of us and our beautiful country. Thank you very much.
And I'm now going to open the floor to a couple of questions. We've got a little bit of time. Please come to the mic and ask your question. If it is offsides, I might reel you out, or I might get Annette to sort you out. Yes.
No offside questions.
Tell us who you are, please, and ask your question.
Morning, I'm Ruben Roberts from Burgersdorp. I just wanted to ask you, do you have any plans to promote farming amongst the youth? Because it's difficult if you don't have a mentor, don't have family who have farms or someone that can help you with that, or you can't afford to send your child to a farming school or such.
Yeah. Thanks, and it's a great question, and I'm not sure if anybody knows, but South Africa will be assuming the presidency of the G20 in November this year, and each country that assumes the presidency gets to choose a theme of that particular presidency. President Lula of Brazil's theme was around food security and combating hunger. The department is currently preparing the themes for our presidency for this sector, and it is a focus on youth and agriculture. It's absolutely essential that we create new generations of younger farmers coming through to be able to take over from the farmers when they retire, when they move on. If we lose the expertise and you lose farmers, it obviously has a huge impact on food security. So the main theme of the department in our G20 presidency of the World Food Councils and the like is going to be on youth and agriculture. But we also then need to make it a lot easier for people and better for people to be able to access agricultural education and to choose it as a career path. And this means that we're going to have to massively revamp our agricultural colleges. It has really pained me to be receiving emails and letters from students at agricultural colleges complaining about the terrible conditions at these agricultural colleges and the like. I think there's going to have to be a lot more investment in that. And then the department is going to have to look very carefully at how we encourage through bursary systems the type of skills that we are requiring. I was horrified in the presentation I've received in the second or third week of being in office around the huge shortage of vets in South Africa and the huge problem with being able to get veterinary services up and running. And I think that through bursary systems and through assisted education, I think we can do it. And obviously then expanding the number of universities that offer agricultural courses as well. And I'm very pleased to say that there are some of the 2 new universities that are being considered for rollouts in things like veterinary and sciences, animal dynamics, etc., as well as farming. So obviously more needs to be done, but I'm hoping that our use of the G20 as a theme of youth in agriculture is going to help us ignite a lot more excitement from younger people to choose agriculture as a way going forward. But then we also need to look at financing schemes, because that is often the biggest barrier for young people to enter farming. How do we find innovative financing schemes that makes it easier for younger people to access finance models, whether it's a blended finance model, whether it's formal access through banks, to be able to get into agriculture and onto farms. And there's going to have to be some innovation that's looked at around that particular aspect. But we have to get younger people into it. And I'm very excited to see that the Young Farmer program that's run by this organization, and I got to chat to some of the guys yesterday evening, and I think the more we're able to highlight this as a potential career path, the better it's going to be. I also think that getting young people, giving them the certainty that there is policy certainty in South Africa around security of land tenure. We'll see a lot less of them going off to work in the United States and other areas where our farmers, and young farmers particularly, are very well sought after on big farming operations in other countries. We need to keep them here in South Africa, and you do that by making sure there's more opportunity for them here in the country. Thanks.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks, Ruben, for that question. Just on the other side of that question, comment. As Agri EC, we've got the Young Farmer Committee, which is really doing well. And questions were given to Agri SA a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, about colleges and schools in agriculture. And Agri EC got involved with the help of the Young Farmer Committee. We sit on the Grootfontein Advisory Council, and very pleased to report that the process of moving those colleges over to higher education is a very positive step, which will mean that the colleges will become semi-autonomous and be run by a council on campus, basically, and not by a national department or multiple departments, for that matter. Also, in Marlow, we've got the Junior Agriculture Association up and running again, and we're getting involved in Burgersdorp School with the agricultural program. So I think there's a big focus from our side as well to get involved in the youth.
Thanks, Ruben. Any other? Dan, you see your hand? You can come to the mic after Dan, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honourable Minister, I think you have you've got your work cut out for you, and I think you know that. But you've made as good a start as I think you possibly can, and I'm going to ask a few unfair questions for where you are in terms of being the minister. What is it now, for a month or so? Just enlighten us on the process. Your speech went cross departments, and we need an enabling environment to do the things that you envisage. Maybe just the process in the Government of National Unity, there must be some policy contestation or differences. Just enlighten, I mean, that is a risk in the short and medium term. It can lead to inactivity rather than activity. Then maybe just second one, if I may, the collaboration within your own department. You came in as the minister, you kept the DG, which we are happy with, but you aligning your whole department in provinces now to what we need to do is, if you can enlighten us there, and then ultimately realigning a budget and getting implementation partners to assist you. So those three very unfair at this stage, but I believe that is the work we need to do. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't think they're unfair questions at all. I think they're excellent questions, and I think they get to the very heart of it. Just in terms of the policy contestation in the GNU, of course, you've got 10 parties in government. It's an unprecedented amount. But I think what unites the 10 parties is a desire to make sure that we've got to make things work, because if one looks at what sits on the other side in Parliament, if that ever gets into the union buildings, we're going to see capital flight, huge loss of confidence in the South African economy overnight. And I'm sure if we were sitting here having this discussion in the light of that, many of Standard Bank's graphs would have been going very much in the other direction. So yes, there are policy disagreements, but I think many of the key fundamental issues that face South Africa, there's huge agreement on. And those are the things: getting the economy moving, getting growth, economic growth out of the doldrums, dealing with the debt crisis in South Africa, and then dealing with some of these crises in South Africa, like energy, like transport and rail, like unemployment. There's huge commonality there. And even on the areas where there is policy contestation, and the most obvious one, which I'm sure you've read in the news, is things like the national health insurance. We remain implacably opposed to the current model that has been rolled out, but we agree fundamentally as other parties that we need universal access to basic health care and decent medical care for all South Africans regardless of their income. I think nobody can contest that that's what we want to achieve. I think there are some differences now about how we achieve it. But the statement of intent, which we all signed as parties to the GNU, has a dispute resolution mechanism built into it, which looks at building consensus, and then if consensus can't be found, sufficient consensus, which would be agreement between necessarily the two largest parties in the GNU that make up by far the majority of it. So I'm confident, and I've really been deeply impressed by President Ramaphosa's openness, his willingness to listen, but also from Cabinet. It's been a very strange thing to sit around the table with people that you've been on the opposite side of in Parliament for so long, and to start talking together about the future of our country. And it's required a mindset change, and it's required a breakdown of the muscle memory that we've had over the last 30 years. But I fundamentally believe that people in the ANC, people in the DA, people in the IFP, people in the Freedom Front, people in the PA, and all these other parties want what's best for South Africa. And we're willing to find agreement on those big issues. And if we just focus on those big issues for the next 5 years and push some of the smaller peripheral differences that we may have, I have a different view to Gates and McKenzie on immigration. But that's not going to be a big issue around what we need to do as a priority of government. And I think that when the medium-term development plan is unveiled by the President later this year, I think you're going to see that huge synthesis of the manifestos of the different parties, which I think have been very, very good. And I'm very, very impressed with the quality and style of the Cabinet so far and the collaboration. It is early days, and it's not necessarily going to be smooth sailing all the way, but I think we've got off to a much better start than anybody expected. And I think that's largely down to the maturity that's been shown by the President and I think the leaders of the other political parties. Sorry, the other one was, I've lost my... Yeah, so I've got a meeting, I think it's next week with the MECs, next week Thursday I think it is. Obviously, provincial agriculture departments are incredibly important partners in this particular sector. And there has to be a good working relationship between the national department and the provincial departments and alignment on strategies and goals. It's no use having ideas at a national level, but then where they have to be implemented on the ground by provincial departments led by MECs, that there's a misalignment. So I intend to work incredibly hard with MECs across all of the provinces to come to a common understanding around what the priorities are and what we need to do and how we can align the objectives at a national, provincial, but then also at a local government level to ensure that you have the chains and the synergy to be able to achieve that what needs to be done. The worst thing that can happen in government is to have a silo approach, and that's where Operation Vulindlela has been so successful in breaking through those silos, is around transversally collaborating and ensuring that you don't have departments working against each other. So the provincial departments and provincial agriculture departments remain some of the most important implementing agents of policy. The grant funding that comes from national government gets channeled through those departments for farmer support programs, for extension services, through other issues. So it's going to make it very important that there is a strong alignment between those provincial departments. But again, I think that the MEC, she's here with us this morning, she wants to see the sector grow. She wants to see more farmers part of the value chain. She wants to see Eastern Cape agricultural projects succeeding, and its farmers succeeding, because that then speaks to the success of her department. And I'm looking forward to working with her and the other MECs to get it going. And the third one was, the budget. Yeah, so as I said, the budget that we've just passed now is an inherited budget from the 6th administration, and we will obviously set out now over the coming few months with the Treasury to start preparing for the medium-term budget policy statement, where there will be some changes. My department will be split, so it'll be the first time that we'll be presenting or having a budget of our own for a while. And so we would obviously then want to make sure that the budget aligns with the strategic objectives of that. I think the Agriculture and Agri-Processing Master Plan has a lot of really good stuff in it. I think there are some things that need to be fine-tuned and updated, and there are some additions that I think we need to make to it. But by and large, I think that the majority of the document is good. I think it's a good start, and I think there's good partnerships there. And obviously, we'd look at, over the next couple of months, listening to what organized agriculture and farmers and provincial departments have to say, what has worked so far since 2022, since that plan was adopted, what hasn't worked, how do we refine it, how do we make sure that it's more fit for purpose and focused, and then to align the budget to achieving the objectives of the department outlined in there. I worry that some of the undertakings made by the department to the AAMP have not been fulfilled, and I want to have an audit done of those, and there's people in the department that are busy working on that, to look at how we've done on a quarter-by-quarter basis in terms of our priorities and undertakings made by government in the Agriculture and Agri-Processing Master Plan, to make sure that it really does become the document that allows us to focus the attention of the department on what needs to be done. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honorable Minister, Octavius Pandil from Farmers Weekly. Partially my question was answered, but specifically what I want to know is, how will your department ensure that agricultural support and resources will actually reach rural communities and marginalized communities? And specifically, what does that mean for emerging farmers? We're obviously concentrating a lot on commercialized farmers here today, but what would your response be to the emerging farmers? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, and it's an excellent question. I think there's a lot of people in South Africa who seem to think that it has to be an either-or. You either help emerging farmers or you help commercial agriculture. I think it's an and in the department. I think you can do both, and I think you can do both effectively. And I think that actually then trying to forge partnerships and linkages between emerging farmers and commercial farmers is the way to go into the future, particularly with sharing of expertise, admission to value chains, assistance with farming practices, etc., are going to be very, very important. In terms of emerging farmers, some of the key impediments there is access to finance, and I think the new blended finance model that's now being developed is incredibly important in terms of starting to overcome that particular challenge for them. But what you have to do, and I think this is where mistakes perhaps have been made in the past, is you can pour as much money as you want into a small emerging farmer to produce, but if he doesn't have linkages and access to markets, you're going to have to keep putting money into that system. I think you've got to focus on two key things when it comes to emerging farming, and that's viability and sustainability, and of course profitability for the farmer, who should be interested in that. And I think that's where the focus has got to be. So making sure we're financing emerging farmers who are able then to be assisted by the department, not only with extension services and advice and assistance, but also with market linkages, so that you then create a viable channel for that particular farmer. You're not having someone producing fields of cabbages that sit and rot because there's no way that they can get them to a market or to a chain. So I think there's going to have to be a lot of attention focused there. I also think that there needs to be greater monitoring on the effectiveness of cash transfers to particularly small and emerging farmers, and that is why the department at a national level is now doing quarterly drawdowns of the funds, so that provinces will provide their particular plans about how they intend to assist emerging farmers, instead of just getting a lump sum of money for the year and then at the end of the year having to account or not account. We want to move towards a quarterly monitoring procedure to see that that money is actually making its way to the farmer who needs it, and that we are getting value for money against the objectives of that particular program. I think that way we'll be able to ensure much more accountability and transparency on funding, but also we're making sure that the money's going actually where it needs to go. And then obviously trying to look at, and this is one of the things in the Agriculture and Agri-Processing Master Plan, is how you also start to help those farmers get access to a slice of the international pie as well. Obviously, it comes down to scale, so you might have to group emerging farmers into groups so that you can get the scalability. But obviously, it's all about market access and the like. We're going to make emerging farmers successful. They need the support, they need the financing, they need the support, but they need the chain to be able to have access to markets to make sure that those projects are then sustainable. I also think that we're going to have to look also, and this is why I'm going to have discussions with my fellow minister in the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform. Is it viable to put 5 farmers onto one piece of land? Is it going to be profitable and sustainable to 5 people sharing a piece of land? Or should we rather look at what Wandile Sihlobo says in his book, fewer better? I think that's the words he used. So you have fewer people on the land, but are able to perform a lot better in terms of the financial outcomes. So there is real value for money for what the department is putting into those programs.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Do you want to ask a question? I'm going to make it the last one, if you don't mind. We need to tick on, and it's been very interesting, and I think largely having our own budget will go a long way, because a lot of it has been swallowed up in land reform, and you've seen no mileage for it, really.
Hi there, Minister. My name is Ryan Snelling. I'm from Henderson Farmers Association. We really welcome your focus on Onderstepoort, OBP, and vaccine deliveries. It's one of our resolutions here today. I'm not sure if you'll be there to listen to it later, but I just wanted to say, please don't forget about the research division of Onderstepoort. They're attached there to the university. They've done some good work for us in the past, but at the moment, they've been working on more than 10 years for a vaccine that is critical to us, called the live attenuated heartwater vaccine. It's a disease that costs the South African livestock industry up to R1 billion a year. And I think it's critical throughout here and in Southern Africa to develop this vaccine in order to assist us moving forward and try to minimize losses in the tough time that we're actually experiencing right now.
Yeah.
I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much for that. I've got to go and meet with the milk farmers in the Humansdorp area for a little bit this afternoon. So I hope I am here to listen to the resolution. But yes, I agree with you, and I will certainly follow up on that vaccine. It's a new one for me. I'll be honest. I will follow up. Annette will make some notes there, and we will follow up with them on the development of that. The ARC as well, Agriculture Research Council, is busy putting together a project as well to build a dedicated foot and mouth vaccine production facility as well. But we'd obviously need to look at how we massively improve the access and availability of all vaccines in South Africa. And as I've said, if a monopoly cannot produce the amounts and quality and quantities required, then I do think you then have to open it up to other players to be allowed to be able to manufacture vaccines as well, because the ultimate goal is to improve biosecurity. The ultimate goal is to make sure that people have access to the vaccines that they need. And if that needs a public-private partnership to work more effectively, then I don't think we should be rushing around trying to maintain monopolies. We should be looking at how do we get as many vaccines into the hands of farmers as quickly as possible. Thanks.
Mr. Minister, thank you. Sorry, there was a guy standing right at the back there, Doc. Do you want to come forward and ask your question quickly, and then we're going to close it off?
Ek is Etienne de Tooy van die Boereverenigings Elandsdrif in Kraddock. Ek wil net graag vir die minister sê ek is baie bly om te sien of te hoor is nie sy bene wat onder daai kortbroek uitgekom het nie. Dis beslis nie boerebene nie. En my oupa het altyd gesê 'n boer los sy voetspore op die plaas en ek hoop dat daai bene van jou gaan voetspore los in die landbou is so. My vraag is een wat ek dink almal van ons baie bekommer en ook die grootste rede is waarom meeste van my vriende alreeds die land verlaat het. Die kwessie rondom die sekerheid of jy op jou plaas gaan bly of nie, expropriation without compensation, and I think it is a very, very serious issue to all of us. You've just said previously said that the two departments are going to split, which means you're going to be in agriculture and the land reform issue is going to be headed under another minister. I would like to know, are we as farmers going to have a certain amount of certainty that this sword that has been hanging over our heads for so many years are going to disappear? And I think all of us here, we would like to invest in agriculture. Most of us are scared to put our money in our farms because of this sword that has been hanging over our heads. I think if we could have a certain amount of surety that we are going to be here and the next generation, my son and my grandson, will be here to be able to farm the land that I have worked and they could continue where I have left over, it would be a tremendous benefit to agriculture.
Baie dankie en ek kan hand op hart sê my vrou stem nie saam nie oor die feit dat ek dink sy sal baie bly wees as daai my bene in daai broeke was. Maar ek wou net sê ja, ek dink die onsekerheid van hierdie beleidsproses van grondonteiening sonder vergoeding onder die pogings om die grondwet te verander in seksie 5.2 het baie groot skade gedoen vir ons ekonomie en selfs ook vir die sektor. Want mense was baie bekommerd daaroor. En ek dink die feit dat ons daai stryd gewen het op die vloer van die parlement, wanneer die regering het daai tyd het nie die stemme gekry het, die meerderheid gekry het om die grondwet te verander, het baie gehelp. Maar ons het gesien, daar's 'n nuwe wetsontwerp wat hulle is nou besig met die 6de administrasie, die expropriation bill, en daar is 'n poging daarbinne om 0 kompensasie in te sit. Ons bly by die punt dat dit ongrondwettig is en daar's geen manier dat dit sal deur die grondwetshof deurgaan as dit in daai wetshof in die vorm wat dit nou is. So we've got confidence that this is something that's going to move off the table. Because if we look at addressing the real problem, in South Africa around why we've not had fast enough land reform, it's not necessarily the availability of land, it is the way in which beneficiaries have been chosen, etc. And there's huge tracts of state-owned land that exist out there that could quite easily be used and handed over to people for land reform programs. The biggest obstacles identified by the Motlanthe Commission high-level panel report into the slow pace of land reform has been a number of things. It's been budget, not enough budget towards it. I think it's not exceeded 1.2% of the national budget ever. And that, in fact, many other priorities have received much more money than that. The second thing is that there's been a large-scale amount of corruption in that particular sector in terms of handing over land and land reform beneficiaries. I think we saw what happened with Vrede Dairy, for instance, in the Free State, with the Guptas being able to get land that actually should have gone to other land reform beneficiaries. And then it's slow pace in handing over title deeds. So I think if we're able to accelerate all those processes, I think we can start to ensure that there is greater transparency and equality in land ownership patterns in South Africa. And I don't think it's necessary to be running around expropriating without compensation farms that are are there. And also, given the fact that there are many people who have tried to sell farms to the department, but are still waiting for the conclusion of those agreements to take place. And so I'm relatively confident that you will start to see a greater deal, more policy certainty coming in this area, given the fact that the goals of the medium-term development plan are to create very, very clear pathway and direction forward, not only for South Africans, but to signal to the rest of the world that we are serious about being open for business, open for investment, and open for partnership with countries and agencies who want to work with us to help grow the country, grow the economy, and deal with the debt crisis that we have, and deal with many of the infrastructure problems that we have. To do so, we have to signal that we are serious about removing the impediments towards economic growth and economic reform. And that policy uncertainty is one of the key areas where there is going to be a focus over the medium term to bring certainty to many, many more sectors, to be able to ensure that we create that environment of certainty, because when that environment of certainty exists, the investment will flow. I believe that there is a huge amount of capital, both domestically and internationally, that is just waiting for the right signs to be able to open up and invest again in our economy. And I think by signaling very clearly those reforms and that certainty, that we will start to unlock that lake of local capital and international capital and get it injected into our economy so that we can start to hopefully grow more than the Standard Bank figures and try and get it closer to 3% than the 1.8, I think it was, that was on the document. So thank you very much. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.